Hello everyone, welcome to Rachel's Chatroom. So I'm Rachel and today I got a very special guest. His name is Seth, a good friend that's based in the US. So Seth has been in the US for a while now. He went there to get his degree, did his MBA, and now he's currently working in the US. He's a fellow Malaysian, but he's been living in the US for more than a decade now. So he's pretty much an American, at least half if not 100%. So today we'll be chatting with him to find out how life has been in the US for him, observations he's made in his daily life about American culture, his likes and dislikes about the US, American culture, and so forth. So Seth, thank you so much for coming onto my chat room to share your experience and thoughts with us. Appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. So good to have you.
Thank you, Rachel. It's my pleasure to be here.
So Seth, now you have lived in the US for more than a decade now. Could you share with us what has been the biggest change in your life? This could be a change in your mindset or attitude or behavior.
Yeah, sure. Before I get into that, I'd like to just say that all the things that I'm going to say is definitely coming from my personal experience.
Sure.
And if I ever said anything that offend either party, that is really not my intention. So give yourself a pat in the back and just say, he didn't mean it. He didn't mean it, right? So
great disclaimer right there, Seth.
I would say the biggest change would definitely, if we are just speaking about American culture, not so much about my personal growth, which I would have gone through the same growth in anywhere I go. I'm not talking about that. I would say the biggest change would be the way I communicate. The way I communicate with people is a little bit more structured and a little bit more well thought through, mostly because when we communicate cross-culturally, we have to be a little bit more careful with the words we use and the way we structure our thoughts and ideas.
Mm-hmm. Could you give us an example? Like what kind of things would you need to think twice before you say it out loud?
I think at this point, I don't know if there's anything I need to think twice before I say it out loud. But in general, things that I have to think twice is usually the way I pronounce certain words. Again, I'm nowhere close to the, American accent. I can't do that. But I try to just focus on enunciation by, speaking clearly and, trying my best to make sure that I reduce any grammatical errors and such. So that would be the stuff that I think twice. But I would also be very careful about thinking twice because it hinders my thought process.
That's true. I think we talked about this in the US. It's very common for people to, just greet one another. Hey, how are you? But from my understanding, it's not exactly an invitation to share your story. It's more of a way of saying hello. Was this something that you needed some time to get used to when you first got to the States?
Yes, that is definitely something that I believe I had to go through. I can't remember in details, but it is true that they tend to ask you how you're doing or how's it going or what's up and things like that. And sometimes you don't really need to answer that. Or, as a courtesy, we just say, what's up, and then that's pretty much it. You don't need to go into depths of your, what you did, yesterday or anything like that. But it's definitely something I would have to get used to responding. But it didn't take too long for me to get used to that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. I think after a while you kind of get used to that. Okay.
Yeah.
So is there one thing you find very hard to adjust to? Like a culture shock, this could be anything. It could be, a way of communicating with people, or it could be the serving portion when it comes to food, something that is very unique to the American culture and it's totally out of your comfort zone.
I would say that just like any cross-cultural experiences, probably there's always, when we go to, say, for example, even China or India or, England, there's always, if I were to bucket people, there's always a group that is not exposed to foreigners and a group that is very interested and has been exposed to foreigners.
Mm-hmm.
So my greatest challenge is with the group that are not really exposed to foreigners. That's where I feel like the conversation that I'm having with them or they are having with me can be overly structured. And there's no free flow in the conversation. probably are not on the same wavelength with regards to jokes, with regards to any inside joke, maybe things that we picked up when we were in our childhood, things that happen in high school, college years. Those are, we are really not on the same wavelength. And on top of that, there's always different kind of slangs that the American people use, and that is very different from, I would say, majority of foreigners. Now, of course, there's two different type of foreigners too. The ones that would always stick to their own group of people, and the ones that will try their best to get to know the American culture. So I think with this four major type of population, it introduces a lot of different kind of mix and experiences. So to summarize it, the biggest challenge would be the flow of communication.
Right. I think that's quite a common experience. Foreigners in other countries would experience as well. But and could you share a bit of your experience in the university there, during your degree days, also while you're pursuing your MBA? Because personally, in Minnesota, from my experience, I remember that education was something that was really different from our culture, as in the Malaysian culture. I noticed the professors there are very interactive with their students. It's more of a two-way thing than a one-way thing, so to speak. Because in the Asian context, usually, at least in the Malaysian context, students have always been expected to kind of listen to whatever their teachers tell them. You don't really challenge your authority figures. Whereas in the States, it's quite the opposite. The professors, the teachers, they actually encourage a lot of interaction, a lot of critical thinking. Is that something you noticed as well in your experience?
Yeah, yes, I would agree with the educational system where there is always a more interactive environment in any given class. Definitely more interactive with classes that is, philosophical or history, those kind of classes that invites more conversation, and not so much on technical classes like mathematics or computer, those kind of classes. You don't really have a lot of interaction going on. But in general sense, most students are not only encouraged to I would say voice out their opinion or even ask their questions. They do not have the concept of, like how in Malaysia we I don't know about everyone, but I know at least from my childhood, we were always taught by our parents to say, hey, don't ask stupid questions, right? Don't ask stupid questions because else people are going to think that you're stupid. But over here, there's no such concept. At least that is not what I feel. So most people are really brave in asking the questions, even in the classroom setting, without worrying about what people might think about them.
Yeah, that is one thing I really like about the American culture. There are no stupid questions, and they are very encouraging. They always have a lot of open discussions. And I like what you said, your last part was that they dare to actually voice out their thoughts without, worrying about what others think, which is something that is very common among Asians, right?
Yeah, yes.
How about your work experience? I know you've been working in the US for quite some time now. Is there something you notice about the Americans when it comes to work?
So I do not have extensive experience working in my own country, Malaysia. All my experiences in Malaysia revolved around retail. So I was a promoter for a boutique store, a cashier, I was a demonstrator. That's pretty much it. So there wasn't really a corporate experience in Malaysia. So I can't really speak for the differences. But I know in America, people, it's very critical about time. So people always have to be on time to work and on time to get off work as well. So you'll be surprised how precise they get off work. When the clock strikes 5 p.m., you hear the bag zipping and you hear the laptop closing. I'm talking about general sense. Not everyone is like that. And people are also a little bit more, again, similar to the educational system. People are more welcoming with regards to collaborative effort from the team members. And usually there's a lot more communication going on between the teams and so on and so forth.
Right. Punctuality, I think you were talking about. Yes, Americans are really very punctual people. That is definitely one of the first things I noticed about American culture when I first got to the States to study. Even their, bus transportation system, everything is right on the dot. I mean, 5 minutes late is 5 minutes late, that it's late, which is very different from the Malaysian culture, because Malaysians are definitely not the most punctual people. And that is definitely something I really admire about the Americans. In the US, also another great thing about the Americans I noticed is that they have really excellent customer service. Whenever you step into a restaurant, the server would greet you at the door. And then also, when you shop at the store, the manager tend to check in with you if you find everything okay, and they tend to your needs as much as they can. Is this something that you enjoy right now in America? Is this something you agree with?
Yeah, that would be something I agree with, in the sense of they are more customer service oriented, and they tend to, I would say they tend to have a structure in their customer service. This is my point of view. I don't know if I 100% believe that all of them believe that customer service is their priority, but they have a structure. So in other words, with the structure, it helps them to, standardize the way they treat customers, like check in at a certain time, or rather, reach out to customers to find out if they need any help, things like that. And with that, it also introduced some other aspect of, maybe I would claim it as a negative aspect of customer service too. For example, when time is up, they would just call it out and say, hey, all right, your time is done, thank you, and go. Once I hired a lawyer to work through some of my, immigration issues and stuff. It was a 1 hour hire. I hired him for an hour, and he was really effective in his consultation. But the moment it hit that dot, even though I have follow-up questions, he would say, done, close the file, and he said, if you want more, you could buy more. So this is the aspect that sometimes, I wouldn't say all the time, but sometimes it nullifies all the great customer service that we had until the end. So I won't deny that there was great customer service. So, but sometimes when it's being cut off like that, it nullifies the entire thing.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying, because coming from an Asian perspective, right? Because Asians, we tend to, try to accommodate people's needs as much as we can, even though we might have gone over time. But I guess in the American culture, it's more acceptable for them to, just call it out as it is. If you're over time, they wouldn't hesitate to tell you that, I'm sorry, time is up. We'll probably carry this into the next session. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting cultural difference. Because there was once my sister and I, we were late to the massage appointment, and then so usually in Malaysia, right, when you're late, yes, obviously we are at fault, but then they would still kind of make up for you, right? Let's say if you're like 10 minutes late, they would still add like 10 minutes after. But then in America, it's the other way around. It's like, I'm sorry, we both understand that it's your fault, you came late, so you're gonna lose the 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. In general, I think it's better this way, because it helps the business to open on time, close on time. And there are many other laws and policies that are being set even at the governmental level. Like, for example, maybe bars, you couldn't open till like past 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. So things has to happen right on the dot. And I think it helps in general. It not only helps with how a person runs the business, but it also helps with keeping human rights, right? The servers, and they are people too. They have family, they have kids, they have husbands and wives, so they have to be back home and spend time with them. So this is, I would say, this is the benefit of having this kind of structure.
Yeah, definitely pros and cons. I think that way, expectations are clear to both sides. Yeah, I think that's definitely a great pro. Right. Yeah. And then Speaking of time and punctuality, I think that ties into personal space, right? I think the concept of personal space is kind of huge in the US, right? So personal space does not necessarily only refer to physical space, right? It actually refers to a lot of things. Like, I think time is definitely one of the personal spaces, right? Because they have a very clear division between work time and personal time. So yeah, could you share like what would fall under personal space besides time, personal time?
I would say emotion could definitely fall on personal space, physical space, what you call chronological space. All these could fall under what we call the personal space. So we can, as far as emotion, this is one thing, at least from my perspective, it is still true up till now. I find it really hard sometimes to bridge that emotional connection with Americans. I don't know if it is because I'm a foreigner or is it because everyone is like that, but from my observation, even among the Americans, when they hang out, they mingle, there's not so much of emotional connection. It's more about other stuff, more basic stuff. When they hang out, they talk about general things. There's not so much about how you feel and it's very interesting because the culture as a whole is moving towards how you feel, but I don't see that happening in more like a smaller circle. They still like keep their emotions guarded, at least from what I can observe. So even from my personal standpoint, when I try to bridge that gap, I've tried many different ways. For example, maybe I should share more of my emotions to get more of them, sharing their emotions. But I always feel like they are not really connecting. So it's really hard to do that from my perspective. So it almost feels like at the emotional level, there's this personal bubble that you can't penetrate unless I don't know what, because I've never been there. So I don't know what yet. It's still a black bubble that I'm trying to understand or even penetrate if possible. There are some maybe allow me into their inner emotional circle a little bit more, but it's not quite how we, like I've connected with other foreigners too, from India, we were able to have emotional connection, even from people from the South America, people from Africa, we were able to have emotional connection, except for the Americans, and up till now I don't know why. I've met a Canadian before. I have no problem with that person either. I was able to have emotional connection with that person. So this is actually, I believe, is one of the biggest challenge with me so far.
That is very, very interesting because I think, being a fellow Asian or Malaysian, I can relate to that. Like certain things, at least during my experience in the States, when you talk to Americans, the topics that you talk about tend to be very general or safe. I don't know what, for lack of a better word. Yeah, I guess then that probably falls under personal space in American culture. And besides emotions, I know there are a lot of other things as well. They are kind of like unspoken personal space, but if you are in that culture, you kind of get it that there are certain topics you don't openly talk about. For instance, like vaccination, which is the hot topic right now. So apparently I heard that, in the US, you're not supposed to ask, someone whether if you have been vaccinated, right? This is a private matter, right? Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I don't know if it is 100% true realistically, because I didn't submerge myself with the topic of vaccination too much, so I don't know all the things that are going on. But generally speaking, for some people, they have a certain type of virtue to not ask about vaccination. But there are some other people who strongly believe that vaccination is important, would be bold about asking that question. Generally, people who avoid asking that question, because people who are over here, people are vaccinated by stages. If you are old and you have some pre-existing condition, you will be the first group that get vaccination, right? So when you ask people about have you been vaccinated, it is more like an indicator of whether you have physical challenges or health issues. So that has become a more sensitive question to ask. But I think up to this point, when everyone has the access to vaccination, it's not so sensitive anymore. I guess people can start asking, have you been vaccinated?
Right. Yeah. And vaccination definitely falls under the health category. And I know that, someone's health status is actually confidential, right? It's not something you openly discuss. Like, I think at least in the Malaysian context, we tend to ask like, hey, is he fine? What is he suffering from? Like, we are quite, I mean, with good intentions though, but then actually in the States, it's not as acceptable. Yeah, because of personal space.
One other thing about personal space, I think now that you brought it up, is also related to material items. So over here, I noticed that people don't tend to ask about how much you spend on a certain thing. For example, if you bought a car, it's not typical. In fact, it's almost rude to ask how much you pay for it. But I think at least from what I can remember, the Malaysian culture is a typical question like, oh, how much did you spend on that? How much, whatever that we buy, that's one of the first questions. How much did you spend? But here it's like almost like a taboo question. You don't really ask. And if you want to ask, usually you ask for permission to ask that question. Like, if you don't mind me asking, but that is almost like a forceful question anyway, because they're not gonna say, oh, I mind that you asked this question. They're still gonna be like, all right, I'll let you ask that question. But generally speaking, people don't ask about how much you spend on the house. People don't ask about how much you spend on cars, not even anything, basically. So that is one other personal space. I would bucket that under personal space as well.
Yeah, that's true, because like what we talked about earlier, right? Asians, it's so common for us to ask people, oh, you got a house, so how much you bought it for? Oh, you got a new car, so how much did that cost, right?
Yeah.
So we do definitely come off nosy to Americans.
Yeah, I believe it's also regional as well. I don't know if people in the southern area are like that. So I'm mainly speaking from my experience in like the Midwest area. So I can't really speak for the coastal areas.
Right, definitely, yeah, because the US is a huge country. Speaking of that, I'd like to talk a little bit about misconceptions about Americans or the USA, right? So what do you think are the most common misconceptions about the American culture?
I think the most common misconception is they're smart. And I'm not trying to say that they're not. I don't know about you, but at least from where I come from, I kept thinking that Americans are geniuses, no matter who they are, like a genius. But obviously, we all know that not everyone is genius. But that kind of notion is sometimes still lingering around in my, I don't know what you call it, but in my conscience, for example, that I tend to give due credit to a fellow American that they are smarter than they actually is. But I think it's probably a common misconception from my perspective.
Right. I think it's because of the media, right? The movies that we're exposed to tend to put the Americans on like a pedestal, not saying that they don't deserve attention and recognition. They do. They've contributed a lot to the world. But I get what you're saying. I mean, I think this applies to pretty much any culture, any country. Like, you've got like the smart ones and not so smart ones, but then the media tend to make them look like everyone there is smart, right? Interesting.
Yes, correct. Other misconception maybe, like I would say, people are friendly. Yes, they are. I'm not denying that. But sometimes when we say friendly, we tend to be like, oh, they're friendly, therefore they are like that, and like that, right? But it's not quite like that. They are friendly until maybe when you ask them for their address, they probably be like, oh no, you can't come to my house, something like that, So they are friendly in general and are upfront, but when you want to get closer into their personal, again, back to the personal space, they tend to have a guard around that.
Right. Yeah. I can kind of relate to that, because I remember when I was there for my studies, that's what I noticed too. For me, I feel like there is a difference between being friendly and being nice, right? But then people tend to think that they're the same thing, which which is not, at least for me, right, not in experience, because people are nice in general, at least in Minnesota where I was at, because I think there's this thing called the Minnesota nice, right? So it's just a common thing. It's just part of the Minnesotan culture where, you be nice to one another. You say, hello, how are you? But that doesn't necessarily mean that I want to be your friend, which is not wrong. I'm just saying that there is a difference, being polite, nice, it's different from being friendly. I don't know, like for me, I think friendly, like what you mentioned, right? I think friendly kind of implies that you want to get to know the other person on a deeper level, like you take a genuine interest in that person's background or culture. So nice is where it just ends at hello, how are you, it's not exactly an invitation for you to be my friend. So I totally get what you're saying about this. That's a very interesting misconception. Thanks for sharing that. And the other thing I'd like to talk to you about is the American dream. You know how the US has been portrayed to be the land of opportunity, a place where you could achieve your dreams, go after what you want in life, regardless of your background. If you are able to land in the USA, you're pretty much, set for life if you work hard, right? So I'm just curious, how true is that to you? Is that something that you could relate to? How has your experience been in the US so far?
I can definitely relate to that, and I would dare to say it's generally true, but not all true. And the reason I say that is that for most part, to come to US is not easy. You probably need to, your family got to be at least upper middle class, or you are being sponsored by a government, or you somehow met someone in America who is willing to, who loves you so much and willing to marry you and things like that. So first off, it's not easy to come to America. So that alone, from that perspective, I don't think anyone can make it in America. But once you are in America, I would agree that yes, you are, I would say you have a lot of freedom in making it. It's easy for you to, the pay is good. Not everything is, it's expensive. For example, a house, I'm talking about Midwest here, it's not as expensive as, in Malaysia. For example, in Malaysia, if you say a developed area, I don't know about now, but I know at least back then, we think about Kuala Lumpur. We think about the capital. We don't think about Perlis or other places, right? And maybe nowadays we think about Johor Bahru, right? Those are the developed areas. But over in the US, I could say everywhere is almost equally developed, with the exception of, New York City and all that. But everywhere is almost, you can have the similar type of lifestyle. Every state has its city. So with that being said, the opportunity is more than just one capital city like Malaysia. Kuala Lumpur, everyone goes to Kuala Lumpur to make it, so to speak. But over here, you have the opportunity to go to the nearest city and make it. From the perspective of, say, business, it's very easy for you to start a business. The money you make, if you're diligent with, managing or stewarding your money and finances, you can start a business, right? But again, with all this opportunity comes a lot of temptation too. For example, you can acquire things at a very cheap price. When I say cheap, I'm not talking about conversion. I'm talking about just dollar to dollar is cheap, and you can acquire all these things. So people, from my perspective, would tend to develop the habit of buying. Then you would be tempted to buying more, and hence, losing the opportunity of the initial, intention of coming over here and to the land of the free and make it. You can't make it if we adopt the American habit of buying. So there's a balance there.
Right. Yeah. I think because there's so much freedom, everything is pretty much within your means, and then
Yep.
everything is accessible. So it's very easy to get distracted because you get a lot of options, right?
Yep.
And then that
Yep.
might distract you from your, like you said, your original goal of, going to the US. It's interesting. My roommate in the US once told me, if you're in the US and you're begging on the street, that means you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
That was like, more than 10 years ago, I heard that. And until today, I still remember, because that line was, wow, I think he made sense in what in what he said, because I think what he was trying to say is that in the US, there's so much freedom, so many things that are, within your means. And if you are begging on the street, that means you're probably not trying hard enough. Do you agree with that?
I would say maybe I should add some preface to that, is that if you are normal and healthy and you're mentally sound and you're begging on the street, then you're not trying hard enough. The reason I say that is sometimes, and you do not have criminal record. So sometimes when people beg on the streets, I think chances are they at some point in their life, they screwed up, they hung up the wrong group of friends, and they have some bad criminal record, right? So people don't just have criminal record by just by their choice. They probably have bad childhood, and then it changed the way they think, the way they operate, that got them there. So in order to get them out, you got to first you got to work all the way back into their experiences, their childhood, and completely help them to have this paradigm shift for them to actually get off the street. So I wouldn't say it's 100% true, but it's generally true. Normal people, if we are begging on the street, then chances are we are not trying hard enough, or we have some other condition, I should say. Some people are just satisfied with what they can get from the streets. And I told you earlier that the buying power here is strong. So if you can get, I don't know, $1,500 a month or $1,000 a month begging on the streets, you can survive, right?
Wow.
Yeah. Well, technically, when you are sick, then you are done. You don't have insurance. You can pay for healthcare, so then you are done. But assuming things are well, you can beg on the streets and you could survive.
Right.
And you don't have to live too poorly. You might have a shelter. You might have somewhere to live.
I think America is so great that even a beggar has a future, right?
Yeah, it's sometimes it's also interesting. I think one of my friends told me that if a country poor people are fat, then you know that I don't know how he put it, but basically, if poor people in a given country is fat, then you know that they are actually
not trying hard enough, or
did
did not try hard.
They don't know what poverty is, because poverty, if you look at other countries, you see their skeleton, you see their bones, you see them having a bulging belly, terrible clothing. But here, poor people are fat and they have a house to live in. Things like that, generally speaking.
True. They are definitely more well-fed than
poor people, not all, but
right. Yeah. So speaking of, being well-fed, I think food is something that I like to, talk about as well, because food was one thing that totally caught my attention when I first went to the States. When it comes to their serving, their portion, it's usually, in jumbo size, right? What can serve one person there could actually serve like two people in Malaysia. Have you gotten used to that, their food portion? How much do you usually order for yourself when you go out to eat?
So I've gotten used to the food portion, that is guilty of me. So they tend to have appetizer, main meal for the what they call the entree, and the dessert. So obviously I can't do all even up till now. I usually just go for the entree. And even with the entree, for the most part, I dare to say nowadays restaurants are moving towards a smaller portion. I don't know if it is economically driven or they just realize that, we need to change our diet. So I noticed in general, restaurants are going towards a smaller portion,
Mhm.
even though the price didn't come down, but they do go towards a smaller portion. But the way I manage it is, yes, sometimes when I'm greedy and I want to eat, I'll just swallow everything. But whenever I can remember, I would try to just split it into half and get a to-go box, bao, right? And then just eat the half over there. So,
Right, yeah. I think that is also to your advantage, right? Because then you get to save on your next meal.
yes. So now this one goes back to, can you make it in America? Yes, you can. You go out. Yes, you spend $10 on a meal. Technically, you could just spend $5 on a meal by taking half to go, right? So there are avenues where you could definitely be more diligent with your money.
Right. And how about food options? Do you get homesick about certain Malaysian Chinese dishes, or you feel like you can find pretty much anything you want there?
Yes, I think in the beginning I was homesick. I was homesick for Malaysian food. For me personally, I really like nasi lemak, and what I told myself is I just have to learn how to make that, and I believe I made my own pretty tasty nasi lemak. At least for myself, I love it. So after that, I almost lost my cravings for any Malaysian food. Coupled with the fact that I am getting, I'm definitely advancing in age, and I've become a little bit more self-aware of my health and fitness. So let's be honest, Malaysian food is not the healthiest, even though we do not have a lot of fat people, but we eat a lot of carbs, and so a lot of our food from the outside has a lot of carbs pretty much, and maybe salt as well. So with that, I almost avoid Malaysian type of food ever since. So I lost all my cravings except for nasi lemak. That's what
But I think you can find nasi lemak, right? I think there's a restaurant called Peninsula. I think that's operated by a fellow Malaysian, right? Is it still there?
It's still there, yes.
That's awesome.
I didn't go there because I believe mine is better than theirs. So
Wow, great. That's good to hear.
hopefully this goes to Peninsula. So if you want my recipe, I can give you for price.
Peninsula, hear this out. Hope you're listening or not.
American dream. So to summarize it, yes. With due diligence, I dare to say anyone can make it in America with due diligence, So do not get tempted by, things that you can easily get. Don't get tempted by the whole idea that you are always going to be good in America. So the chances are you make a lot of money now, and you'll be like, I'm going to make a lot of money in the future anyway, so why not spend, as much as I want now, right? So if we cultivate this kind of attitude, then chances are we are still going to be just like, if we are in Malaysia. So yes, anyone can make it if they are diligent with their resources.
That's true. Yeah, I think that's a very important disclaimer, due diligence, right? Because
I'm a number one guilty of it.
Even if you're
because I spend money on things like that, right? And
AliExpress, right?
yes. So mainly because I feel like I
deserve it.
Have a little bit more dollars or whatever, but it's a bad habit to cultivate.
Yeah, I think every now and then, it's good to buy something to reward yourself with, but not like major spending all the time. Yeah, I think what you meant to say was nothing is free, right? Even though you're in the land of opportunity, you still have to put in the hard work to get what you want.
Yeah,
right.
Correct.
And so we were speaking about the Peninsula restaurant, right? So speaking of restaurants, I know in America, they have a big tipping culture, which is not very common at all in Malaysia. You don't usually tip your servers, at least not in every restaurant. Yeah. So could you share with us, talk a little bit about that? What is the acceptable percentage? How much you're actually expected to give to your server?
Yeah, I would say the acceptable percentage is around 15%. I don't think I've visited this topic for a while now, so I have been maintaining 15% all along. But I think I have started to understand more about the tipping culture a little bit better, and I do see value in tipping. Sadly enough, Asians don't tip a lot. So, but I try to break that stereotype, and
Thank you,
sometimes
Seth.
it motivates me to
Asian
tip
represent.
tip a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, I have been tipping 15%, but then I realized that it's hard to do the math 15%, so I usually do 20% just because it's easier, math. Again, I'm Asian, maybe my math is not as good as a lot of people might think, so 20% is easier to calculate.
Which works to their favor, to the server's favor, to their advantage.
Favor, yeah. And I learned a little bit more about the tipping culture because I realized that actually servers, their base salary is not good enough. I think it's below the poverty line. So they rely on the tipping to at least break through the poverty line. So with that understanding, it gives me a little bit more motivation to tip better. But of course, there are other groups that we'll talk about. Why not the restaurant just pay them above the poverty line and not worry about tipping? So I don't know the answer to that. Maybe some other fellow Americans would know the answer to that. But I think this also motivates maybe even the server to do their best, right, in their service. And even sometimes in the hotel, some Americans, not all, I dare to say minority Americans may leave a tip in the hotel, even though it's not required, it's not a common practice. Some Americans leave tips in the hotel for the hotel, staff when they come and, clean up the room and reset the room. That is something I'm beginning to learn as well. But again, it's hard to fight my own way of thinking because I have this voice in my head from, our Asian roots, where we say, why do you tip? Tip, it's not required, don't tip. You have a lot of money. If you have a lot of money, why not you give me, right? Why do you tip?
True.
Something like that.
Yeah, I think it's because of a cultural difference, right? Because at least in Malaysia, you feel like you've already paid the fair amount. Why do I have to, give you extra? But I guess it's just different because, like you said, their base salary, it's really not that much, so they rely a lot on tips. And I've also read about, waiters sharing their experience online. And I believe it's something a lot of waiters in the US could relate to, or at least have experience, whereby they have customers who didn't tip them accordingly, even though their service may not have been like excellent, but definitely good enough to earn like a little tip, but yet did not get tipped. And some of them even run out of the restaurant to, chase for a tip because that's how much they depend on the tip, right, for giving. So I think that's something very interesting and different from, our Malaysian culture.
And I think if any Americans who is watching this interview, I would encourage, I'll appreciate your patience to, quote unquote, I would say educate foreigners about this tipping culture, because it's definitely not common. We don't think about adding the tip. I had personally experienced twice, I believe, where I was being told off or yelled at for not tipping, really. And for the most part, it wasn't intentional. It just wasn't part of my habit. So I would appreciate if they would just say, hey, just so you know, I know you are new here in America, welcome. Just so you know, over here we rely on the tip to meet our base rate or our minimum wage. So I appreciate it if you could tip. I think it's best to not assume that we didn't tip because the service is bad. Chances are we don't know. We didn't know.
True. I agree. So, they should probably include this in like their orientation program or something.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that is, an important part to cover in the orientation program because, like you said, it's not done out of like, bad intentions, but more so because, we really didn't know that before. Yeah, but and obviously,
in fact, what I can say to a lot of, at least I represent myself, once we adopt this idea of tipping, it's really hard for us to also say, your service is bad, I'm going to tip you less. Chances are we're still going to tip you that 15-20%, because once we adopt it, it's hard for us to just call people out sometimes, so chances are we always still tip,
Yeah.
50%. So if you give us a little bit of patience, you'll probably get a lot more reward back, even though your service is bad.
Right. Yeah. It's like more like a token of appreciation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's that's very interesting. Even though your service may not be excellent, but because of the virtue of the tipping culture, you still get something anyway.
Yes, that's right.
Right. Thank you so much, Seth. I think we covered a lot of things already. So, any final thoughts, or maybe the last question would be, how would you define the American culture in one line? What is American culture to you?
In one line, how long can the line be? How many ends can I use? And what?
Okay, you can use 10 ends and 5 buts. I think that's probably long enough, right? But in 10 seconds. I'm just kidding. Just express the way you want.
I'm not a very cultural person, so I don't really look too deep into the culture and stuff like that. I would say as far as the American culture goes, it's so interesting why I can only think about the negative. So let me try to think about the positive. Because I guess for the Asian standard, the positive is nothing. It's like expected. So it's like it becomes not positive, right? When you get 98% in your score,
That's
it's like,
true.
oh, so
That's
what?
true.
Everyone has 98%.
That's true, because our standard is 100%.
Yes. So let me throw some words first. Okay, American culture, they are nice, they are helpful. Okay, this one for sure. Why I want to say that they are helpful, because I have a few times I got stuck in the snow on the road or got in a car accident. People would just stop and help you, regardless of who you are. But in Malaysia, you know who is stopping there to help you? The toll company.
That is true, because they can't wait to get your money.
Yes. And other people may not, be there to help you. I don't know. Maybe things have changed, but yes, they are helpful. They would not go out of their way to help you, but if they see danger, they will be there. They will help. Okay, so helpful, nice, hardworking for those who are working. And so this is what I would say. In general, I would summarize, the American culture as, people who are generally nice, helpful, even though they do not go out of their way to help you. But when they see danger, they would help you.
They will do the right thing.
They will do the right thing. They are well versed in a lot of general topics within the America. Some people might know a lot more what is happening outside of America. I think this mostly comes from the educational system. And they know how to enjoy life, and with especially beer and fried food.
I like how you ended on that.
Yes.
But
so
yes,
that is what I would.
thank you so much, Seth, for sharing your thoughts and
No
experience. I think you sum it up, in a very good way. Any last words for the viewers?
I hope this is more encouraging and more informational, more informative for people who are watching this. And again, not everything is the way I said it. I've definitely met a lot of great people and a lot of not so great people. I'm talking about some great people actually have changed my life personally, and that I don't know if I can get that in Malaysia. I don't know, but at least the not so good people didn't really affect me. So in general, my experiences here has been wonderful.
Right, that's good to know. Yes, Americans are definitely a nice bunch. They are very hardworking. They are go-getters, right? They are very courageous. They go for what they want. They are very outspoken, very articulate. Yeah, I do have very good impression of Americans. Obviously, having said that, they have their shortcomings too, just like anyone else, any other culture. But I think it was a great session overall. This is definitely for sharing purposes and not to put anyone down. So thank you so much again, Seth, for doing this with me, for sharing your experience. It's been such a great time catching up with you.
You're welcome.
And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. This is Rachel's Chat Room. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.